Assessing Student Learning Quickly and Effectively, the Minute Paper. Are you interested in learning quick and effective ways to assess student learning? Are you interested in finding why students are having difficulty understanding and applying certain concepts they've just learned? Here is one classroom assessment technique, the Minute Paper. The Minute Paper. What is it? And how does it really work? It's a technique commonly used to collect feedback on student learning or check students' understanding of the course material, regardless of class size. It's an activity that students often complete during or outside of a class in response to an instructor-posed question or questions, which prompt students to reflect on the day's lecture or discussion. This technique is quite simple to implement. Natalie, a GSI for Intro to Public Health, has used this technique in her sections. Let's hear from her.
This simple classroom assessment technique can help achieve many goals. It allows me to hear from all students rather than just a few. It's also a low-stakes way for me to see how well they understand course lectures or readings. In class, it can kickstart thinking, leading to more thoughtful participation. It also gives students another way to interact with the material and me. It may be particularly useful for reaching quiet students. Finally, it can help me to plan my discussion sections. Here are two common ways I have used minute papers. Before class, I assign the minute paper exercise in C tools. Sometimes I provide specific prompts, and sometimes I simply ask students to write a brief comment or question in response to a reading. I set a length requirement, usually a range anywhere from one sentence to one half of a page. I also set a clear deadline, such as 5 p.m. the day before my section. This gives me time to briefly review student responses before class. Sometimes I respond directly to their questions or comments online, if I have time. Either way, in class, I discuss themes, respond to questions, and integrate their responses into my teaching activities, as appropriate. For example, based on their questions or comments, I might add an extra practice problem, or draw on real-world examples to help them make a connection between the theory and practice. This process also enables me to increase student participation. I may say something like, "Joe had an interesting question in his post this week. Joe, can you pose your question to the class?" I also use minute papers during class. At the beginning of class, I may ask students to free write in response to a prompt. For example, in today's lecture, we talked about the U.S. healthcare system. What are some of its strengths? What are some of its weaknesses? Then, in large groups, students begin by discussing what they have written. They may include examples from the lecture, the readings, or their personal experiences. If I collect the minute papers, I am able to direct subsequent reviews, activities, and discussions to address anything incorrect or missing in their responses. I always tell them in advance if I will be collecting their papers and let them know whether to include their names.
As you can see, there are many ways to use the minute paper and different questions you can ask to meet your teaching and learning needs. Students can complete this activity before class using C Tools or Google Form, or they can complete the activity at any time during a class period, simply using a piece of paper. This classroom assessment technique works well in a small discussion section, such as the Intro to Public Health course. This strategy also works well in large lectures. For example, Professor Joanna Milinchik uses this technique in her large materials science and engineering class.
I often use this technique to assess students' understanding of course concepts by asking them to identify concepts that were least clear to them or ask a question like, "What was the muddiest point in today's lecture?" The first time, students were given blank index cards to identify one or two concepts or topics that they didn't fully understand for each chapter. And based on student responses, I created screencasts to provide additional examples and explanations and demonstrate worked out problems at the end of each chapter. These screencasts were then posted online before the exam. The following semester, I moved away from the index card to an online survey for students to identify a concept or topic that they found confusing. Based on their responses, I created screencasts to provide explanations on topic that at least 30% of students didn't feel confident answering. The screencasts were posted soon after the end of the unit and before quizzes that tested on that topic. Students found the quick classroom assessment technique, or the muddiest point, very useful in helping identify areas for confusion, and also found the screencasts very helpful in clarifying concepts and aiding understanding. For example, one student described his or her concern about basis, which is the smallest repeating unit in a crystal lattice, as follows. Basis seemed to be a simple concept at the beginning when we had only one element involved. However, when we moved on to the materials with somewhat more complicated basis, the whole concept of basis became confusing, mainly because I just could not visualize those molecular structures with a basis comprised of multiple elements. The screencast, however, helped to clarify the concept.
The minute paper is not only useful for lectures and discussions, but it can also be easily adapted to lab sessions, study groups, field trips, homework assignments, and tests or exams. For more information about classroom assessment techniques, sample minute paper questions, and examples of how they are used regardless of class size, visit the CRLT website at www.crlt.umich.edu.